Don't forget to like this video if you found it meaningful and subscribe to the channel for more true-to-life stories about standing up for what's right, overcoming adversity, and finding your voice. Your support helps us keep sharing narratives that uplift, empower, and remind us that integrity never goes out of style. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. And please share your thoughts. Let's build a community that values truth, courage, and wisdom. Claire, after 16 years, your approach is outdated, Mark Daniels declared, leaning back in his leather chair with a smug grin. We need you out by tomorrow. I sat across from him in the boardroom of Evermark Shipping's New York City headquarters, my hands folded neatly on the gleaming walnut table. Behind him, the Manhattan skyline glistened through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a view I'd admired for years during high-stakes meetings in this very room. I understand, I replied evenly, locking eyes with him. Thank you for the opportunity. My calm response seemed to throw him off. His brow furrowed slightly, as if he'd expected protests or tears. Instead, I gathered my notes, adjusted my navy blazer, and stood, walking out with my head high. My name is Claire Prescott. I'm 54 years old and have devoted 16 years to overseeing the financial controls at Evermark Shipping, a global logistics company operating in over 40 countries. I've weathered 3 CEOs, 2 economic downturns, and multiple reorganizations. I've designed systems that saved the company millions and safeguarded it from compliance risks. And now I had just been unceremoniously dismissed by a man who'd been here less than 90 days. Mark Daniels arrived at Evermark with a polished Ivy League pedigree, a resume from a top consulting firm, and bold promises of transforming financial management. The board had been dazzled by his slick presentations and aggressive vision. But what they didn't see, what I had spotted immediately, were the gaps in his claims, the vague allusions to past achievements, and a disturbing readiness to bend accounting standards. As I packed my belongings into cardboard boxes, I reflected on a private meeting I'd had 2 weeks earlier with Deborah Lynn, the chair of the audit committee. She'd asked me to stop by after hours, closing her door behind me. "Claire," she'd said softly, sliding a folder across her mahogany desk, "we're seeing unusual patterns in expense reports and vendor contracts tied to Mark's office. It's not concrete yet, but enough to be concerned. We'd like you to investigate quietly." I had already begun noticing discrepancies, large consulting payments to obscure firms, travel expenses that didn't align with official itineraries, and contracts modified after approval. True to form, I had been meticulously organizing evidence, documenting every irregularity. What Mark Daniels failed to realize when he fired me was that I wasn't just some outdated financial controller. I was the architect of Evermark's entire financial control infrastructure. I knew every system pathway, every approval checkpoint, every audit log. Most importantly, I knew exactly what to look for to uncover whatever he was concealing. As I carried my boxes to the parking garage, I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was resolved. Mark Daniels had just made the biggest mistake of his brief career. I've never been one for public displays of emotion. My mother, a university librarian, had taught me from a young age that evidence and logic would always outlast drama and noise. That belief had guided me all my life, especially in the world of finance, where precision and proof were everything. When I stepped into my modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, it welcomed me with its quiet warmth. 16 years at Evermark had afforded me a comfortable, secure life, not luxurious, but solid. My retirement account was healthy. My mortgage nearly paid off. I could have walked away. I could have left Mark to whatever scheme he was orchestrating and simply started fresh somewhere else. But that wasn't who I was. I poured a glass of Cabernet, set my laptop on the kitchen table, and spread out the documents I'd been quietly collecting over the past few weeks. Before leaving the office, I'd sent myself a set of publicly accessible reports, nothing proprietary, nothing confidential. But placed in the right sequence, they painted a troubling picture. My phone buzzed with a message from Deborah. "Heard the news. Call me." I dialed immediately. "Claire, I can't believe they pushed you out," she said. "Not unexpected," I replied. "Mark's been maneuvering since he arrived." Deborah's voice lowered. "The timing is suspicious, considering what you were looking into." "I'm close," I said. "Give me a little time. I'm not done yet." And as I stared out at the city lights, I knew the fight was just beginning. My mortgage was nearly paid off. I could have simply moved on, secured another role somewhere else, and let Mark Daniels continue whatever scheme he had underway. But that wasn't who I was. I poured myself a glass of Merlot and settled at the small kitchen table in my Queens apartment, laying out the files I'd been quietly gathering over the past month. Before leaving the office, I'd sent myself a curated set of reports, completely above board, all publicly accessible within the company's policy. Nothing proprietary, nothing confidential. I wasn't about to compromise my ethics. But even these publicly available documents, when analyzed together, told a troubling story. My phone buzzed. A message from Deborah Lynn flashed across the screen. "Just heard. Call me." I didn't hesitate. I tapped her number. "Claire, I can't believe it," Deborah said the moment she answered. "They blindsided you." "Not exactly a surprise," I replied quietly. "Mark's been maneuvering to push me out since day one. I just didn't expect him to act so quickly." Deborah exhaled, her tone cautious. "The timing feels strategic, especially given what you uncovered." "I'm close to tying it together," I told her. "I've spotted recurring patterns in several consulting contracts linked to a company called Silverwood Partners. It's registered, but I can't find any record of actual operations." "That's deeply troubling," Deborah murmured. "But unless we have a direct connection to Mark, the board won't act." "I understand," I said. "Give me 2 weeks. I may not have direct system access anymore, but I know who to talk to, and I know exactly what to search for." We ended the call, and I spent the rest of the evening mapping out my approach. I drafted a timeline of Mark's decisions since his arrival, cross-referencing each with unusual financial movements. I listed colleagues who might be able to quietly verify internal details without jeopardizing their positions. I identified external firms that could help validate my suspicions. The next morning, instead of commuting to the Evermark offices as I had for 16 years, I turned my dining table into a war room. My laptop, spiral notebooks, highlighters, and printed reports filled every inch of space. I reached out to trusted contacts in the New York financial sector, former colleagues now working at banks that handled Evermark's accounts. While they couldn't disclose specific records, their subtle confirmations hinted I was on the right track. Something was definitely off in the financial arrangements Mark had set up. About a week into my investigation, an unexpected knock sounded at my door. When I opened it, Anthony Vargas, Evermark's IT director, stood nervously in the hallway, glancing behind him as if someone might be watching. "Sorry to drop by without notice," he said, adjusting his glasses. "But I couldn't risk sending this electronically." I stepped aside, motioning him in. "Coffee?" He nodded gratefully. "Thanks. Things have been strange since you left," Anthony admitted once we sat down. "Mark brought in an outside cybersecurity team. They've restricted system access. Even I can't see certain financial workflows anymore." "That's unusual," I said, keeping my expression neutral though my pulse quickened. "There's more," Anthony added. "Yesterday, I was instructed to pull all emails between you and the audit committee from the past 6 months. I had to follow the request officially." He reached into his messenger bag and slid a small flash drive across the table. "But I wanted you to know." I stared at the drive, realization settling in. Mark wasn't just removing me, he was actively covering his tracks. He'd realized the audit committee was looking into him. Anthony's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "Claire, he's trying to erase any trail that could link him to those payments." I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of his words. "Thank you for trusting me, Anthony," I said softly. "You're doing the right thing." He nodded. "Be careful, Claire. He's dangerous." As he left, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Anthony had included not just the emails Mark requested, but deeper system logs showing unusual access patterns, unauthorized data transfers, expedited approvals, flagged exceptions. Mark Daniels wasn't just bending the rules. He was actively rewriting them. And he didn't know I was already 5 steps ahead. Mark's decision to fire me suddenly clicked into place. He had discovered I'd been investigating his activities. "Thank you for putting yourself on the line," I told Anthony sincerely as he gathered his jacket. After he left, I wasted no time. I inserted the flash drive into my laptop and opened the files. Anthony hadn't just included the emails Mark was hunting for, he had slipped me a goldmine: internal system logs showing unauthorized access attempts and irregular data transfers. Massive batches of financial data had been exported in the middle of the night, approved through shortcuts I had never implemented in my system designs. It was subtle, but undeniable. The following morning brought another gut punch. My phone rang, flashing Melissa Young, my longtime assistant's name. Her voice trembled the moment I answered. "Claire, they're saying awful things about you," she whispered, on the verge of tears. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting down. "Mark told the whole department you were under investigation for financial misconduct. That you were fired for cause. He's saying you manipulated vendor agreements and built secret backdoors into the finance system." For the first time since my dismissal, I felt a white-hot anger rising. Mark wasn't just covering his tracks, he was trying to destroy my reputation. "What else did he say, Melissa?" I pressed. "That the company might have to restate earnings because of errors tied to your oversight. That everything had been hidden behind your authority. It was a clever tactic, discredit me before I could challenge him. But Mark had made a crucial mistake. He dragged my name through the mud publicly. Now, I had every right to defend myself just as publicly." "Melissa, I need a favor," I said calmly. "Can you get me the latest version of the Brighton Logistics contract? The one Mark renegotiated last month?" "I don't have clearance anymore," she said quietly. "Check the archive logs," I suggested. A snapshot should have been saved before the changes were finalized. Later that afternoon, an encrypted email arrived from Melissa. Inside was exactly what I needed: proof that the contract had been altered post-approval, diverting millions in fees toward vague consulting firms. I cross-referenced the payments. The recipients? Companies with barely any online presence, minimal filings, and no tangible operations. I was certain Mark was funneling funds into shell entities. I forwarded everything to Deborah. Her reply was swift and direct: "Come to my home office tonight. Bring every document." Deborah's townhouse in Brooklyn Heights reflected her character: organized, classic, but equipped with the latest tech. Multiple monitors displayed spreadsheets and legal records as we spread my findings across her massive oak desk. "The board's divided," she explained. "Half think Mark's shaking things up in a good way. The other half are worried but won't move without ironclad proof." "This isn't a debate about modernization," I argued, pointing to the altered contracts. "These changes weren't board-approved. They added $2.9 million in consulting fees to firms that don't exist beyond paper." Deborah studied the files, frowning. "It's shady, but without a direct tie to Mark, it's circumstantial." "I have a lead," I said, pulling up a corporate filing I'd obtained through industry contacts. Both consulting firms, Silverwood Partners and Easton Advisory, were incorporated 6 months ago by the same law office. Deborah's eyebrows lifted. "The same firm Mark's old company uses?" "Exactly. And there's more." I opened another document, highlighting the listed authorized representative, Rebecca Daniels. Deborah's gaze sharpened. "Any relation?" "His wife," I confirmed. "She uses her maiden name professionally, but I dug up their marriage announcement from 10 years ago in the New York Times." Deborah leaned back, absorbing the revelation. "Claire, this isn't just questionable. We're talking potential fraud, conflict of interest, misappropriation." "Which is why he needed me gone," I said quietly. "He knew I'd flag it during audits." But he didn't expect we'd already tasked you with investigating, Deborah added, giving me a faint smile, the first I'd seen from her in weeks. For the next 4 hours, we meticulously compiled a comprehensive report. Every breadcrumb, every transfer, every signature was aligned into a cohesive case. By the time I left Deborah's home, the city's skyline glowing in the distance, I felt something I hadn't since my firing: hope. The evidence was powerful, but I knew the battle wasn't over. Mark had allies, and they wouldn't surrender quietly. Tomorrow, the real confrontation would begin. Deborah leaned back in her chair, her lips pressed together as she absorbed the full weight of the discovery. "This is escalating quickly, Claire," she said at last. "We're looking at serious violations, fraud, conflicts of interest, misappropriation of company funds." "That's exactly why Mark needed me out of the way," I explained. As controller, it was only a matter of time before I flagged these transactions during routine reviews. He knew it. "But he didn't count on us already asking you to keep an eye on him," Deborah added, her expression softening into the first smile I'd seen from her in weeks. For the next 3 hours, we worked tirelessly, assembling every piece of the puzzle into a clear, organized presentation. The pattern couldn't be ignored. Mark had orchestrated a sophisticated scheme to funnel Evermark's money into shell companies tied to his wife, disguising it all as legitimate consulting fees. Preliminary estimates showed nearly $4.8 million diverted in just over 3 months. Driving home that night across the Brooklyn Bridge, I allowed myself a cautious sense of hope. We had solid evidence, but the politics were delicate. Mark had powerful allies on the board, some of whom had championed his hiring. They wouldn't let him fall without a fight. At exactly 6:15 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang. I saw Melissa's name flashing and immediately answered. "Claire, something's happening," she whispered urgently. "A third-party audit team showed up this morning. They're pulling financial records going back 5 years, everything from your entire tenure." My stomach clenched. Mark wasn't backing down. He was escalating. He was going on the offensive, trying to dig up or invent anything that could tarnish my record. "Who authorized the audit?" I asked. "Mark says it came from the board," Melissa replied hesitantly. But what?" I pressed. "I overheard him on a call earlier. He said, they haven't found anything useful yet, but keep looking. We need hard evidence before the emergency board meeting." My pulse quickened. An emergency board meeting meant Deborah had already shared our findings with key members. Mark was scrambling, trying to shift the narrative and pin blame on me before the board turned on him. "Thank you, Melissa. Please, be careful. Don't get caught helping me." "I won't," she promised quietly. "A lot of us know who's really been keeping this company honest." The next 2 days felt like a high-stakes chess match. Mark made his next move with a sudden press conference, framed as a bold announcement of Evermark's financial system overhaul. But woven into his speech were thinly veiled suggestions of prior financial mismanagement and concerning legacy practices that had been brought to light. He never used my name, but everyone inside the company, and many outside, knew exactly who he was implicating. I watched the live stream from my apartment, noting the tension beneath his polished words, the forced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was rattled. My phone lit up nonstop with messages from old colleagues, industry peers, even former auditors. Many were outraged, texting their support, dismissing Mark's claims as slanderous. I responded with quiet gratitude, but said little else. This wasn't the moment to engage publicly. I needed to stay focused. I reached out to a law school friend now working at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Without crossing any lines, she provided invaluable guidance on what regulatory bodies would view as definitive proof of corporate fraud. Armed with that knowledge, I refined our case. I mapped the financial trail from Evermark's payments to the shell firms, then traced their accounts until I could link the money back to Mark and Rebecca. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While cross-referencing Mark's travel reimbursements, I uncovered a recurring pattern: multiple weekend trips to Boston, billed as investor meetings. Yet Evermark's investor relations calendar showed no such meetings scheduled. I dug deeper, searching public records, and found it. Rebecca had opened an art gallery in Boston 3 months ago. Social media posts revealed Mark standing beside her at the grand opening, the same weekend he claimed he was meeting potential investors. My heart pounded as I connected the dots. The gallery's funding? It listed Silverwood Partners as its primary investor, the same shell company draining Evermark's accounts. I sent the evidence to Deborah with a single line. "I think we have him." Moments later, she replied, "Board meeting moved up. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. That evening, as the city lights shimmered outside my window, I knew the endgame had begun. Tomorrow, I'd walk back into that boardroom, not as the woman they forced out, but as the one bringing the truth to light. The company had covered Mark's weekend stays at five-star hotels under the guise of investor meetings, yet cross-referencing those dates with Evermark's investor relations calendar revealed no such appointments. Then came the missing link. A few clicks through social media unearthed it. Rebecca Daniels had opened an art gallery in Boston just 3 months ago. Photos from the grand opening showed Mark standing proudly beside his wife, the very weekend he claimed to be entertaining potential investors on Evermark's dime. Digging deeper into public records, I found the gallery's business registration. Its primary source of funding? Silverwood Partners, the same shell firm funneling consulting fees from Evermark. I forwarded everything to Deborah with a single message: "We've got the connection." Her reply came swiftly: "Emergency board meeting moved up. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. That evening, an unexpected knock rattled my front door. Standing there was Robert Klein, Evermark's general counsel, looking unusually uneasy. "Claire, may I come in?" he asked politely. I hesitated. Robert was a company loyalist, reporting directly to the CEO. His allegiances were hard to read. Sensing my caution, he added, "I understand your hesitation. But I'm here on behalf of the board." "What's this about?" I asked, still blocking the doorway. "The audit committee has submitted substantial findings. The board wants to hear from everyone involved," Robert explained, holding out an envelope. "This is a formal invitation to tomorrow's meeting. Not a subpoena, but I strongly recommend you attend." I took the letter, scanning its official wording. After Robert left, I immediately called Deborah. "It's real," she confirmed. "Some of the board members pushed for your presence. They want your side firsthand." "Mark will be there," I said. "He'll be ready to discredit me." "Then you need to be more prepared than he is," Deborah advised quietly. I spent the night refining my materials, turning every discovery into a clear, irrefutable narrative. I left emotion out of it, just facts, figures, dates, names. The numbers told the story. As the sun rose over Manhattan, I readied myself. I selected a charcoal pantsuit that projected quiet authority, reviewed my slides one final time, and headed out. Arriving at Evermark's headquarters, I was met by security, who escorted me to the executive floor I'd once called home. Familiar faces watched me pass, some with quiet support, others with curiosity, a few with silent encouragement. Outside the boardroom, I took a deep breath. In mere moments, I'd confront the man who had tried to erase my reputation. But unlike Mark, I had truth in my corner. Inside, the room fell still as I entered. 14 faces turned my way, the 12 board members, Deborah seated at their head, and Mark, looking markedly older and paler than just a week ago. "Ms. Prescott, thank you for joining us," said Harold Bennett, the board chairman. "We're in an unusual position requiring clarity." I nodded respectfully and took the empty seat directly across from Mark. He attempted a confident smirk, but it faltered when our eyes met. For those not fully briefed, Harold continued, "Serious concerns have been raised about financial discrepancies during Mr. Daniels' tenure. In response, an independent audit was authorized." Mark leaned forward. "With respect, Chairman, inviting Ms. Prescott is improper. She's no longer employed here and has a personal vendetta against me. She's here at my request, Deborah interjected firmly. As chair of the audit committee, I asked Ms. Prescott to investigate discrepancies prior to her dismissal. A murmur rippled through the board. Mark's face tightened. I believe it's best Ms. Prescott presents her findings directly, Deborah added. Harold nodded. Proceed, Ms. Prescott. I stood, connected my laptop to the projector, and launched the first slide. Methodically, I walked them through the contract alterations, the paper trail of shell companies, the financial transfers tied back to Rebecca Daniels. I showed screenshots, filings, emails, wire receipts. Every slide built the narrative, how Mark had systematically siphoned funds under the guise of consulting fees, redirecting company money into entities controlled by his spouse. When I finished, the boardroom was silent. Ms. Prescott, Harold said after a pause, are you alleging direct involvement by Mr. Daniels in this scheme? I met his gaze calmly. The documentation speaks for itself, Chairman. Across the table, Mark's complexion had drained to ash. The reckoning had arrived. Under Mr. Daniels's tenure, Harold concluded. Counterclaims suggest these accusations are retaliatory in nature, stemming from Ms. Prescott's dismissal. Mark leaned forward, adopting a respectful tone. Chairman, with all due respect, having Ms. Prescott here is improper. She's no longer an employee and has shown clear hostility toward me. She's here at my request, Deborah interjected, her voice firm and unwavering. As chair of the audit committee, I commissioned her review before her termination, not after. I caught the subtle looks of surprise exchanged between a few board members. It was clear Mark had been managing the narrative until now. I believe it would benefit the board to hear directly from Ms. Prescott, Deborah added. Harold gave a nod. Please proceed, Ms. Prescott. I stood, connected my laptop to the display system, and took a deep breath. Then I began. Carefully, deliberately, I walked them through the evidence. I showed discrepancies in contract amendments, the link between the shell companies and Rebecca Daniels, the questionable transfers, the misuse of corporate funds masked as legitimate consulting payments. I displayed screenshots, corporate filings, system logs, travel reimbursements tied to non-existent meetings, and photos from the gallery's grand opening connecting Mark directly to the scheme. Each slide layered over the last, building an undeniable case. Based on the documentation, I concluded after nearly 30 minutes, approximately $8 million have been diverted from Evermark Shipping into entities controlled directly or indirectly by Mr. Daniels or his immediate family, disguised as valid business expenses. The room remained silent for several long moments. Across the table, Mark had gone visibly pale. These are baseless accusations, he finally managed, his voice strained. This is a vindictive attempt to. Are you denying that Rebecca Daniels is your wife? One board member asked sharply. Or that Silverwood Partners funded her gallery's launch, pressed another. Or that you billed the company for investor meetings that never took place? Added a third. Mark's gaze darted from face to face, searching desperately for an ally. None emerged. These connections are lacking full context, he argued weakly. There are legitimate business reasons for. I've heard enough, Harold cut in. Mr. Daniels, please wait outside while the board deliberates. You can't seriously be entertaining this, Mark protested, his composure slipping. She's biased, she. Outside, Mr. Daniels, Harold repeated firmly. You'll have the opportunity to respond formally through counsel. Mark hesitated, but ultimately stood and left the room, the door closing sharply behind him. Harold turned back to me. Ms. Prescott, thank you for your detailed presentation. The board also requests you step outside while we discuss next steps. I gathered my materials and approached the door. As I reached for the handle, Harold called out once more. Ms. Prescott, he said with a hint of warmth, the methods you employed gathering this information, would you call them outdated? A small smile crossed my face. I prefer the term thorough, Chairman Bennett. A few board members chuckled softly, easing the room's tension. In the hallway, I spotted Mark speaking urgently with Robert Klein. When he noticed me, he broke off mid-sentence, his expression hardening into fury. "You think this is over?" he hissed under his breath. "I've got connections you couldn't imagine." I kept my tone calm, steady. "Unfortunately for you, Mark, I don't rely on imagination. I rely on evidence." The next 2 hours stretched long as I waited quietly in a side conference room, answering messages on my phone. Outside, Mark paced back and forth, making heated phone calls, his voice rising with frustration. At last, Robert returned. "The board would like to see both of you." We walked back into the boardroom together. Harold's expression revealed nothing. The air was thick with finality. After careful review, Harold began, his voice measured. "The board has reached a decision." I braced myself, knowing the moment of reckoning had arrived. After a thorough review of the findings, Harold announced, his tone steady and formal, "The board has reached several decisions." He glanced briefly at each member seated around the table before continuing. "First, the board has determined there is ample cause to terminate Mr. Daniels' employment with Evermark Shipping, effective immediately." Mark jolted forward in his chair. "This is absurd," he started, but Harold raised a hand, silencing him. "Second," Harold went on, "the board has reported the financial discrepancies and related documentation to the proper regulatory authorities. Mr. Daniels, I strongly recommend that you secure legal representation as soon as possible." A flush crept up Mark's neck and face, his jaw tightening. "You're making a grave mistake," he snapped. "I can explain all of this." "Save your explanations for the investigation," Harold interrupted coolly. "Security will accompany you to retrieve your belongings." As security officers appeared at the doorway, Mark glared at me with a venomous expression. He allowed himself a final muttered warning before being escorted out. When the door closed behind him, Harold turned toward me. "Ms. Prescott," he said, his tone softening, "on behalf of the board, I want to extend our sincere apology. It's clear now that your dismissal was orchestrated to obstruct oversight." "Thank you, Chairman," I replied, keeping my voice composed despite the swirl of emotions inside me. Harold nodded thoughtfully. "Which leads to our third point," he continued. "The board would like to offer you reinstatement to your previous role, along with a significant increase in compensation to acknowledge your dedication and the expanded responsibilities we believe you've earned." I blinked, momentarily stunned. I had focused so completely on uncovering the truth, I hadn't imagined this outcome. Deborah spoke up next. "In addition, Claire, we'd like to create a new executive role reporting directly to the Audit Committee, Chief Compliance Officer. You would have independent authority to investigate financial matters without interference from other executives." The offer carried weight, greater authority, direct board access, and, reading between the lines, insulation from future power plays like Mark's. I took a breath. "I'm honored," I said carefully. "I'd like a little time to consider." "Of course," Harold agreed. "But I hope you'll recognize how deeply this company needs the integrity you've shown, methodical, ethical, and, by all appearances, unshakable." 3 weeks later, I walked back through Evermark's doors, no longer an outsider, but as the company's first chief compliance officer. My initial task was a sweeping audit of all transactions during Mark's short but damaging tenure. The impact was significant, yet not irreparable. Thanks to swift action and legal follow-up, most of the diverted funds were recovered through lawsuits targeting the shell companies he'd used. The media coverage was relentless. Headlines ranged from "CFO's bold tactics masked bold crimes" to "Compliance Chief uncovers $8 million fraud at Evermark." I declined interview requests, preferring to focus on fortifying Evermark's internal controls rather than basking in headlines. Over the next 6 months, I assembled a team of forensic accountants and compliance specialists equally committed to transparency and diligence. Together, We rebuilt systems and implemented new safeguards to ensure this couldn't happen again. Then, one afternoon, an email arrived in my inbox. Mark Daniels had accepted a plea deal. He pled guilty to charges of wire fraud and embezzlement, agreeing to forfeit all illicit gains and serve 4 years in federal prison. Rebecca's gallery was shuttered and liquidated to repay part of the restitution. That same day, Deborah stopped by my office, smiling faintly. "Feeling vindicated?" she asked. I leaned back in my chair. "Not really," I answered truthfully. I never needed vindication. I just needed the truth to surface. Deborah's smile widened knowingly. "Well, the board's relieved. Your compliance program has already prevented 2 significant control breaches. They're impressed." "Just doing what I've always done," I said. "Your old-fashioned approach," she teased lightly. I allowed myself a small laugh. I've come to appreciate that label. It turns out cross-checking data, verifying sources, and actually tracking where the money flows are considered revolutionary these days. Deborah raised an imaginary glass. "Here's to being old-fashioned." "I prefer to call it classic," I replied with a grin. "Like vintage wine. Or balanced ledgers." As I reflected on everything, the sleepless nights, the risk, the difficult choices, I realized Mark's greatest error wasn't simply the fraud or even targeting me personally. It was underestimating the enduring strength of integrity. He dismissed my methods as outdated, never realizing that those very practices would unravel his deception. Now, as I build Evermark's compliance division into a pillar of accountability, I've learned that sometimes the most powerful form of revenge isn't retribution. It's proving your worth. And proving, without question, that integrity never goes out of style.